Hadar, hello. Welcome to Luke's English podcast.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me here.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm very very much looking forward to kind of finding out all about you and about your learning English and teaching English experiences, because you strike me as being a sort of very motivated and focused person who has kind of been very successful as a language learner. And now you've flipped that to actually helping other people do the same kind of thing, right?
Right. I like it that you think of me as a focused person, because sometimes it really doesn't feel that way. Quite the opposite. But yeah, I think I have a very interesting English journey as a learner, and then that has turned into teaching, which to me, it's still a part of my English learning journey. Because when you teach, I'm sure you feel the same, that when you teach, you learn so much more about the language than when you just speak it. So to me, It feels like I've learned the most once I started teaching, from just myself trying to clarify how to explain something, and then it starts making sense to me, but also how to make it easy for people to understand. So yeah, it's and it's an ongoing journey.
So tell me about your experiences then, right? So you moved to the States at some point, and that's where your kind of language learning really took off. Is that correct?
So I studied English at school. I wasn't born in an English-speaking country. I was born in Israel. So I was, I wasn't even exposed to English until the age of 13, when we started getting more TV shows from the US. And honestly, I think my studies were very not great, bad in school. Like I didn't even have a good grade during my high school years. But I'm a very attentive person. Like I like listening to people and to the language. I'm very much in love with the sounds of the language. And at the age of 20, I moved to New York, or 21. I moved to New York to just explore life, and then later to study acting. And I think this is where it started getting interesting for me, because I realized that there is a big gap between who I am and my ability to express who I am because of the language. And up until that point, English was not like a mission for me to learn. I knew the language, but I didn't know how limited it was once I tried to actually make a life for myself in an English-speaking country.
Tell us about the English that you had at the time that you moved to the States, right? So when you were about 20, 21 years old, give us an idea of what your English was like.
Yeah, so I was able to have decent conversations, not deep conversations. My vocabulary was limited. And I also had a very distinct Israeli accent, because right now what you're hearing is after some work that I had put in throughout my years in acting school, because I did study pronunciation. So it was very obvious that I'm not an American. So there would always be a conversation around who you are. Who are you? Where are you from? Your accent is so cute. You sound so exotic, and all of that. And I think that made me realize I really wanted to belong and to immerse, to fit in, actually. I wanted to be an American. I had this dream that this is it. I'm going to become an American actress. And like that clashed every time I had a conversation, because people were pointing out everything about how I sounded, about my sounds, or making fun jokes about how I use the words. And no, this is not the right word. And you're so cute. And I honestly hated it, because it just kept reminding me how much I actually don't belong in their eyes. Now, of course, that wasn't meant in a bad way on their part. These were my friends, or, people I worked with. But it really made me feel like I need to commit to this journey where I make English my own, so that I choose to talk about my English journey, and not it being chosen for me by other people communicating with me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Because when you were speaking to people, there was just this thing that they had to talk about, this thing they couldn't get beyond, which is like, oh, you sound different, or like your English was something that they couldn't quite get past. It was a barrier.
You're not from here.
And there was a lack of control.
It's a sense of control. Like I don't want it to be about where I'm from. I want it to be about the conversation. So in the attempt of fixing that, I also changed my name, which is something that I'm not very proud of now. But like when I started living in the US, and I was working there, I named myself Julia so that my name wouldn't stick out as Hadar. Oh, Hadar, that's not an American name. Where you're from? It didn't help because people still kept asking me about.
And they were like, "So wait, where are you from? Where did people think you were from? I guess they went through a list of places, right? They're like, are you from this? Where did they think you were from?
I got Brazilian, Dominican Republic. I got Middle Eastern, which is, like my roots are from there. Actually, I'm born and raised in Israel, but my mom is from Libya. My dad was born in Iraq. Like my roots are Middle Eastern, and so I would get that a lot. And Israeli, because there are a lot of Israelis in New York, so people would also kind of like, oh, you're from there, right? Let's talk about your country, and that's not always a conversation I'm ready to have. So.
But then you were like, oh, hi, I'm Julia. And they'd be like, Julia, really? Julia? And yeah, exactly. I can see what happened. Yeah. Okay.
I think this is why I'm very adamant about talking a lot about identity and language in my teaching, because we cannot disassociate it, especially immigrants living in the US, like trying to understand how to fit in or how to feel like they belong. And because it goes way beyond the language experience, the right grammar or the right pronunciation, which is also something that I really focus on, because that mindset could potentially lead to your success or to your failure in a way in how you feel in the language.
Okay, so what happened then? So you were experiencing all these things and these feelings and these responses, and the conversations were all about the fact that people couldn't get beyond the way you sounded and the words you were using and so on. So I guess this became a big motivation for you to kind of try and change that. So what did you do?
Yeah, so that was a big motivation, but also I started studying acting in New York City, and I had that other aspect of the language that I wanted to have freedom and more opportunities. And when you have an accent, you have very limited opportunities in the acting world, especially in the US. So I knew that I had to work on my pronunciation to acquire an American accent, so I could use it if I wanted to apply for a role where the character is Native American, North American. So that's, and I also fell in love with the sound. So I also think that I'm very geared towards the sounds of the language. I love the musicality of it. So when I started learning sounds, it was a perfect fit. I was passionate about learning it. It made total sense. I noticed how I'm able to change how I sound and what it gets me, right? How I'm able to communicate my message better. It built my confidence. I was able to actually improve my fluency through working on sounds. As funny as that may sound, like it wasn't limiting me because I made it my own. And then I was able to express myself more fluently. But I think that during that time, it was still a matter of the external, like how it seems on the outside. So all of a sudden I was getting closer and closer to sounding like a native. But I have to say, looking back, like that was 20 something years ago. So I think that back then it was really also about how it seemed to other people. So it did build my confidence, but there was also this, okay, now I sound closer to a native, but I actually don't feel super confident in the language. So my fear was bigger that what if I make a mistake and people would be like, how come she makes this silly mistake if she sounds like a native? The imposter syndrome, right? Like she's a fraud. Right. So on one hand, I would feel more freedom. On the other hand, I would feel like, wait, but what about what's happening inside? Because I'm actually sometimes afraid, especially speaking to native speakers, to be perceived as like to create that, it's going to be an anomaly. Like how come this is happening? So that was
Yeah.
constantly in my mind. Now I'm going to fast forward to like the time where I started teaching, and I started teaching like all the things that I've learned as a student, because I was very passionate about pronunciation, and I felt like, okay, no one really talks about it. I moved back to my home country after a few years, and I really missed the this type of work. And also, I needed another source of income, and I was like, let's try and teach pronunciation. And I was focusing on that. And I back to what I said at the beginning, I think that I've learned so much about pronunciation, so much more when I started teaching it. And at the beginning of my teaching journey, I feel like I was still very connected to this idea of sounds and how to change your sounds, and like that concept of speak like a native, because this is what I had learned. This is what I knew. And even though I know that it wasn't like the most immersive experience or the most complete, holistic, I have more adjectives if you want, but like the most holistic experience, I can come up with a few more.
Go ahead, list them all. Global, holistic, complete, overall,
immersive. Yeah. It was still about the external experience. So it was helping my students to a certain level. But it wasn't until the point where I had to transform internally about who I am as a non-native speaker, and then to own up my identity as a non-native speaker, knowing that as one, no matter how I sound, I need to give myself permission to show up as I am, with the potential of me making mistakes, because I know that no matter how hard I try, sometimes when I speak really fast, like it might not be aligned. And I think I was so terrified of that conflict that there was I wasn't showing up as my authentic self. And I wasn't ever, I never really felt super confident in the language. And it was only until that transition that I said, I'm not going to hide the fact that I'm a non-native speaker. I'm going to use it and say, this is me. And this is me with everything that you see, like with the awkwardness and the getting stuck sometimes and the making mistakes sometimes, not when I teach, but sometimes when I speak. And that is my value. And the moment I did that, I think something shifted inside of me and allowed me to start really owning the language. So it wasn't just the external work. It was really the internal work that made the difference, and then allowed me to show up and do what I do and, help many people around the world.
So what do you think is the most important thing to prioritize then? I mean, language learning, there are many different things, as you know. There are many different language systems. There's many different skills involved and identity issues. What do you think is the most important one to focus on?
I think first of all, it depends on the stage. If you're just starting out, then I think that working on building the right habits, just, we had an episode that we recorded on for my podcast and channel. And I think you said the 5 Ps: practice, 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 practice. It's really all about that. So to develop the lifestyle that will allow you to practice effectively every single day. And I think that people are so wrapped up in the illusion of learning. They're consuming content, but they're not putting it into practice, so that they think like they practice, but they don't really practice. So they feel like they're on a hamster wheel. They're just in motion, but they're not moving anywhere. And that happens because they don't put what they learn into practice. So first of all, I think that developing strong habits about showing up to do your practice, finding joy and motivation in it. So always reminding to yourself why you do this, that will create the right foundations. And then whether you learn grammar or vocabulary or pronunciation, you will have nice, strong foundations for you to carry it through until you actually get to develop your language. So that is one aspect. But I think I always I created this thing called the fluency wheel, which is the 6 pillars of fluency: confidence and mindset, pronunciation, grammar and syntax, you can call it, listening comprehension, speaking time, and active vocabulary. So which is the number of words that you
Yeah.
actually are comfortable using, not the words that you know. And you need to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 in all of those elements, and they need to be equally strong. So it doesn't matter if you give yourself 3 or 8. It doesn't have to be 8. But if 3 of them are 8 and 3 of them are 2, then there's going to be a gap between your knowledge and your ability to communicate yourself. So because people have different needs and different experiences. So I think that it's important to identify your weak points and then to focus on that to get stronger there so that you have your all those pillars are equally strong.
So, try and practice across the board, try and sort of focus on all those different areas.
Not all of them. Your weakest areas.
The weak ones.
Yeah. The ones that are not strong. So for example, if you would give yourself 8 for grammar, like you're confident and you have this knowledge, but you don't speak, right? Let's say you have 0 opportunities to speak. I don't think that you will be able to put what you learn into practice. So it will affect your fluency. It will affect your confidence when it's time for you to speak. Your grammar is not going to be there for you if you don't constantly use it. Even if it's just recording yourself, right? You don't have to live in an English-speaking country to succeed. So I think it's the 20-80 rule, right? The Pareto principle. Focus on the 20% that will get you 80% of the results. And a lot of times it's really hard for learners to know what is their 20%. So they just watch YouTube and listen to podcasts. And, we were both content creators and we know that the content we create sometimes would be good for some people and for others, it might be a little too much or too soon, or we can't control. We do what we love and what we believe is helpful for our students. But as consumers of content, I think that people should take ownership and know, okay, this is critical for me because this is my weak point, or I am geared to, to this. I have a lot of students who are very passionate about pronunciation. So they practice it more and more because they love it, but then they don't put in any work in grammar or vocabulary, right? So it really is about knowing you're focusing on what is critical for your fluency at this stage.
So going back to you and your story, so you identified that pronunciation was the thing to work on.
Yeah.
Right? And you just talked about the importance of doing the right kind of practice and the right kind of habits.
Right.
So what sort of habits and practice did you use then to develop your pronunciation?
First, it was developing my listening skills, my ability to perceive the differences. Because I think one of the reasons why it was hard for me to understand what I'm doing wrong is because I couldn't hear it. I'm going to give you an example. For example, the aspirated P, pay, where you feel like there's a little H that is different from spray, where the P does not pop as well. Now, for me, it sounded always the same. And it's not critical for clarity. So if I were to say pay, people would still understand it. But once I learned about it, it was just like I started hearing it. And then when I started hearing it, it was a lot easier for me to use it. And that is a subtle thing. Sometimes there are bigger things like sheep, ship, or pool, pull, right? Vowels that are very similar. And for some speakers who don't have all those vowels in English, they may categorize it as one, which is what I used to do. So first it was to really pay attention to what I'm hearing and not to use the filter of the written word to can perceive the sounds, which is what I used to do before that.
Did you have any particular resources that helped you to sort of decode the oral version of English?
So I was lucky because I was in my acting studies. We had speech and pronunciation classes where they actually taught us all those sounds. This is where my brain was like, now I get it.
So you're talking about the phonemes, the phonemic chart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is why I teach my students, because they know it's going to help them. It doesn't only help with pronunciation, but also with listening. Because when you hear those sounds, you recognize the difference between the words that may sound the same if you are not aware of those differences. So pronunciation is not just for how you sound, it's really how you hear and how you perceive the language, especially when it comes to reductions and similar
and
sounds.
if you think about it, I mean, pronunciation is absolutely the most important part of the oral version of English, isn't it? Surely. I mean, obviously there are the words and the structure that we're using to build it, but pronunciation deals with how it should sound, what it sounds like when you're hearing it, and how you actually mechanically do it, how you create those sounds with your body. So it's tremendously important. And yeah, you're right. People often don't, they don't prioritize it. People worry about it and stuff, but maybe people don't know how to do it. This is like a bit of a mystery.
I think it's not easy to teach when you first learn a language and people don't have the skills, so they avoid doing it. But when you think about it, when you think about language acquisition, how kids learn a language, it's first of all hearing, and then it's producing right away, producing the sounds, all the babbling phase where they go ga 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 ba 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 ba, right? Like trying out the sounds. That's how a language is produced. And trying a word again and again and again until you get it right. Why not learn a language the way the brain is geared to learn or thrives in, like when it learns a new language, your first language? I take a lot of my work, a lot of my teaching from like learning language acquisition.
Sure. Absolutely. This makes total sense to like base the teaching theory on the understanding of how people actually learn languages. I guess like people are quite sort of focused on results from the very beginning, and people want to be able to do things right from the very start. But this approach that you're talking about does seem to involve quite a lot of error, like getting it wrong a lot before you get it right, and you can't really expect to get it right first time round. You're going to have to keep doing it and doing it again. Yeah. And that's where all of those identity issues and all the pain comes in.
Right.
Because there's all that stuff about the fear of getting it wrong and so on.
We are a culture of perfectionism, like perfectionists, right? Like perfectionism is celebrated, and it really clashes with the idea of language learning. And so you're absolutely right. I talk about making mistakes all the time, but also about repetition. So when you learn a sound, right, when you hear it, to be able to transform it or to put it in your mouth and get it right, then you need to learn the physicality of how to produce it, right? So you need the rules, like the science behind pronunciation, but then you need to make it your own. I call it to build pronunciation confidence, and that's all about repetition, mistakes, intentional learning. So it's not just to repeat the mistake, is also teach yourself how to know if you are actually getting the sound right, or you're just repeating something that is convenient or an old habit, old pronunciation habit that you bring to from your language. For example, if you're trying to pronounce the R and you learn that you need to pull the tongue in at the sides of the tongue and around your lips, great. And then let's say you practice run, read, and then gradually your tongue goes to the r sound. Maybe you're a Spanish speaker and you'll say right, really. And you don't notice and you keep repeating it with the old pronunciation. So I think it's not just about repeating it. It's also being very intentional. It's quality over quantity. Don't just do it again and again and again, but do it really focused, knowing that you're actually changing something.
So let's go back to methods and resources then.
Yes.
And maybe using you as a case study. So you were doing acting classes, you were learning the phonemic script. What did you actually do with the phonemic script? Because a lot of people, they'll see the chart and it's just like, oh my God, another language I have to learn?
Yeah.
It's kind of like an alphabet within the alphabet, and people just kind of like go, no thanks. What was it that you actually did with it?
So like when I learned it, and also when I teach it, we took specific sounds and we learned how to pronounce them, and then we drilled them, like said the sound in words in all different positions, beginning, middle, and end, again and again and again, and then in short phrases, and then in sentences. And this is also something that I use because I don't want to focus so much on IPA. I do use it. I think it's a great tool, but I don't want to make people feel like they have to understand it to understand sounds. They have to feel the sounds inside their mouth. So I think that is the main thing, like to understand what happens and to create like that new category of sound in your mouth and in your brain. So I would maybe like to turn what I like my story into a method, which is how I also teach pronunciation. It really is about understanding the differences, perceiving the differences, then learning how to pronounce it, then the repetition, knowing that you are actually pronouncing it correctly, building confidence using the sound, but then using it intentionally. And this is something that I did in scripts and texts. So I would take my speech work and then use it in real life. Use it when I would go into scene study classes and learn different scenes or memorize texts or speak to my friends. I was always conscious of how I'm actually taking what I've learned and using it when speaking.
Okay, your guys are now doing their work again in the background. That's right. We're going to carry on, even though there's some noise in the background. We'll see if we can work around it.
Can you hear?
Talk to me about shadowing. What is shadowing and how do you do it?
So shadowing is a technique that I used quite a lot, which is basically to take someone that you like their voice, you like how they sound and how they use their speech, and then you basically follow what they say, paying attention to the specific intonation, rhythm, and stress and specific sounds. So you would usually focus on a specific sound and then repeat what they say and try to always get it right. And I think that with shadowing, the good thing about it is that you can kind of like repeat it again and again and again until, you get it in your body and not just in your head.
I wonder if we can carry on with that noise.
I wonder.
It might be a bit too much.
I'm so sorry.
I think maybe
this was not.
No, don't worry. I understand. This is what it's like. When you're not in a professional studio. It's
this is my professional studio. They're renovating the studio next door.
Oh really?
It is. Yes, it's not supposed to happen.
Right,
this is what I'm paying for this. Yeah.
Don't worry. So I guess we could probably wrap up and then maybe sort of reconvene at another time and have another conversation. But it's going to seem a bit shorter than my normal episodes, but that's okay. So all right. Well, maybe kind of just to wrap up here. You asked me at the end of your episode with me to kind of give a single piece of advice. I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. What do you think? What single piece of advice would you give to learners of English?
I think that trusting that you deserve to be heard, no matter what the outcome is. Because I know it's a struggle. I know that we try to get it right. And there's nothing wrong with always striving for being better and getting and improving yourself. But at the end of the day, when you're speaking, it's all about communication. It's all about making an impact. It's all about being heard. And I think that unless you give yourself that permission to be heard and that you deserve to be heard, and people actually are interested in what you have to say, I think you would find it really hard to communicate. So the internal work aligned with the practice and everything that you're doing is not less important. And it's worthwhile kind of like investing in that when you do this work, when you learn a language.
Very nice. Thank you. Where can everyone find you and your content?
So you can actually find me on hadarshemesh.com. That's my website. And I have a podcast called the Influency Podcast. So if you're a podcast listener, I think, you might like podcasts better, this podcast.
Great. So everyone, links will be in the description as usual and on the page for the episode. Hadar, thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
Thank you so much, Luke. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, me too. And, let's speak again. Okay. Because there's loads of other stuff that we can talk about.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And, bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.